We just had the biggest game of the Premier League season so far. Arsenal against Man City, a potential title decider. Arsenal came out 1-0 winners in a game that might not have lived up to expectations, but there's something I saw before the game that I want to talk about. The match was being promoted by these two players. Erling Haaland, the world's best goal scorer and potential Ballon d'Or winner, and Martin Odegaard, the midfielder who has led Arteta's revolution at Arsenal. Both of these players, arguably the two top players on the Premier League's two top teams, actually share a national team. They both play for Norway, and I am really excited about that country's future. One of the big reasons why the future's bright is because their stars are still young. Odegaard and Haaland are 24 and 23. They're both already world-class players, and they will only continue to improve. It's scary to think about how good they could be come, let's say, the next World Cup. But what about right now? Because if you look at Norway's qualifying campaign, things aren't looking so good. They'll need either a massive collapse from Spain or Scotland to even qualify. Maybe they get some help from teams above them in Nations League rankings to squeak into the playoffs. But this qualifying campaign went bad. And when you look at this Norway team, there's a perception that it's two elite players surrounded by, well, no help. And I can see why this perception exists. This was supposed to be the year Norway finally broke through and qualified for a major tournament. But despite good performances by Odegaard and Haaland, they probably won't make it. I think one of the main problems is that Norway keeps producing really good strikers, some freaks of nature with similar profiles to Haaland who have to play out of position to accommodate him. I will say that former Crystal Palace player Sorloth has done alright, but I don't think it's been ideal. Then their third best player in my opinion, Fredrik Aursnes, is a player who does very well for Benfica, but he's somebody who's more versatile than a focal point of the team, and he hasn't been able to shine for Norway. But I think when you dig a little bit deeper, you can see there's a lot of talent on this Norwegian side beyond just Odegaard and Haaland. At the back, Norway has a potential center-back partnership of Kristoffer Ajer and Leo Østigård. Ajer has been very good for Brentford this season, both defensively and on the ball, looking very good playing out of the back, and I thought he did a strong job against Manchester United on the weekend. Then Leo Østigård just scored a goal against Real Madrid, and then proceeded to get destroyed by Jude Bellingham. But hey, that's Jude Bellingham. I'm leaning towards calling him the best player in the world, which probably isn't something I should say in a video where I have Erling Haaland on the thumbnail, but hey, it's a very good competition at the top. Østigård, he's still a bit raw, but he's been flashing some potential for Napoli, and he's only 23, Ajer is only 25, and that's a really good center-back partnership for 2026. Dortmund's Julian Ryerson is a good option at right back and left back, though ideally on the right. He has an engine going up and down the field and looks good defensively. He's only 25 and is another starter at a Champions League club. So you might be wondering, if Norway has this many good defenders, why exactly is their qualification campaign going so poorly? Well, 1, injuries, and 2, their coach, Skiri Østigård, isn't that good. He got the job off of a good campaign in Denmark, but whenever he's gotten a bigger job, it hasn't gone well, and I believe he's done poorly in both Euro and World Cup qualification. But I should say that there are some decent Norwegian managers to look for the future. Ole Gunnar Solskjaer's name I've heard floated out ever since he left Manchester United. Now, he didn't leave the club with the best reputation, but when you look at what Ralf Rangnick and Erik ten Hag did with the team, you can't say that Solskjaer did a bad job. In fact, I think you can make a case that he's been the best United manager since Ferguson left, which isn't a very high bar to clear. Then you have Bodo Glimt manager Kjetil Knutsen, who's led them to a few Norwegian league titles, as well as a good run in Europe, which included a 6-1 win over Jose Mourinho's Roma team. He's been linked with a job at Rangers, Celtic, and Ajax. Ajax definitely should have hired him. But it's hard to say if these guys will be real upgrades over Solbakken, especially Knutsen with him not having too much experience. And maybe Norway should look around the world for managers, but I think they have a few good domestic options for 2026. And speaking of 2026, Norway has a ton of good prospects. Chief among them is Antonio Nusa, the 18-year-old wonder kid from Club Brugge. The winger has already made his debut for Norway, in which he scored, and speaking of debuts, last season he was the youngest ever to score in his first Champions League game. He's a dynamic winger whose dribbling is a huge strength, and his end product has reached another level this season. I think he has legitimate world-class potential and is a can't-miss prospect. Then there's Oscar Bobb, Erling Haaland's teammate at Man City. He's a player I've heard about for a while, and when I finally got to see him play against pros, I believe the hype. He's an extremely talented dribbler and a great technical player. He's a left-footed player who can play on the wing or in midfield. With him being at Man City, I've seen comparisons to Bernardo Silva, and I get it. Speaking of Bernardo Silva, I don't know if he'd be better on the right or in the midfield for Norway. Having another great midfielder alongside Odegaard would be huge, but they don't have many good left-footed options on the wing, which is ironic given that Odegaard and Haaland are both left-footed, but they play through the middle. But either way, Oscar Bobb is going to elevate this Norway team. He's just received his first call-up, and I believe he's another player who's a can't-miss talent who's going to be really good in the future. Outside of Nusa and Bobb, who I feel like are sure things, there are also some really exciting prospects. Andreas Schjelderup is a Benfica player. He's been loaned to Norse and Denmark, and he looks like a really exciting player. I've talked about him a bit in the past. Subscribe if you're interested. I'm sure this isn't the last time I talk about Norway or national teams on the rise in general. But he can play an attacking midfield role as well as a wide forward on the left. I really like him in that wide forward spot. He can cut in and score a ton of goals. He's a really good goals threat. He's only 19, and he's only going to get better. Sander Berge from Burnley is a very good player. He's 25 right now, and he's already a Premier League player, so he's already a strong option for Norway, but I think he has another level that he can reach. He's huge, he's very tall, and he's got a lot of talent on the ball. He has had some consistency issues in the past, but if Vincent Kompany is able to get the best out of him, I think that he has a Champions League future ahead of him, and if he can really put that talent together, he'll be a great player for this Norwegian team. Two more players I want to talk about are Osame Sahraoui and Christos Zafeiris. Now, I haven't seen as much film on these guys, so I'm less sure about how great they can be, but I've heard a lot of good things. Sahraoui is a winger from Henrevin in the Netherlands, which is a club that Odegaard has breakout years with. He's already had a couple good goal contributions and is really showing off his talent. Then Zafeiris, he's only playing in Czechia, but he's been showing a ton of energy and technique, and I think he could be a really good player at the base of the midfield who would allow guys like Odegaard and Bobb to show their stuff in the future. Both of them are only 20, and add them to players who are bound to emerge for Norway in the coming years, and you have a lot of good talent in this squad besides just Haaland and Odegaard. But despite how exciting this Norway team is, there are some problems that I noticed for this team that could pop up in the future. One of them is left back. Right now their left back is Berge Melling, who's a decent player, but he recently took the step down to Copenhagen and he's already 28. He's not somebody who I see as a real option for the future. You could play Julian Ryerson on the left, and that's not a bad idea. You have a good backup left back in Marcus Peterson, who's a pretty good prospect, but ideally you'd want Ryerson on the right, and he's not a left-footed player. Fredrik Aursnes is another really versatile guy. I mentioned his versatility earlier. He's played left back for Benfica in the past, but I'm not sure you want to take him out of the midfield, and again, he's not a natural left back. There are some prospects as more natural left backs. You have Leo Hjelde from Leeds. He's only 20 years old, and he does look like a decent player, but he isn't playing right now, and because of that, I'm kind of unsure about his potential. Then you have somebody like Vete Wale Hjelde, who looked good for Norway's under-19 team, but if I'm honest, he's not even the player I'm most excited about in his family. Then you have somebody like Fredrik Aursnes, who plays for PSV, but I haven't seen him play much, and I don't think that he'll break through at PSV. This is a bit of a tangent, but when I was looking at other national teams on the rise, see people talk about Ireland, that's another team I could talk about in the future. When they get to left back, they also have an issue, and they try to hype up Tayo Admirola, who's a player at Crystal Palace, who I know pretty well, and listen, I'm rooting for him, but if he's able to make it stick in the championship, that would be a massive success for him. And I'm not going to pretend that this is a great position or anything. Right now, I'd bet on Leo Hjelde. I do see some potential there, but this is a position that could very well end up being a weak point for Norway, or maybe they just have to play somebody out of position. Goalkeeper is another weakness for Norway, which is a bit weird for me. Rune Jarstein had been good for them for so long, but he's 39 now, and he never really recovered from an illness. Am I allowed to say what that is now? I remember that was a thing for a while. Their current number one is Ørjan Nyland. He's 33, and he's somebody who looks kind of content to just be a backup, and that's what I was expecting when he joined Sevilla. But then he unexpectedly became the starter. Now, he is going to be 36 by the next World Cup, and he might be a backup again by then, but goalkeepers can play for a long time, and he might just be a late bloomer. And if he's still the starter for Sevilla by then, he's going to be another Champions League player and probably a Europa League champion. And Norway better hope that Nyland is still playing at a high level, because outside of him, there's not much. You have another Leeds youngster in Kristoffer Ajer, but he's not playing and not sure about him. Mads Christensen seems to show some promise, and there are some domestic options, but nobody's a real standout on like Nyland. So just cross your fingers, hope you get lucky. Nyland's gotten lucky in the past, and hope that Nyland is still playing at a high level because he's the only real option Norway have. But despite concerns at left back and goalkeeper, this looks to be a dangerous team by the 2026 World Cup, and hey, if they get some luck, maybe at the upcoming Euro. When you have Haaland and Odegaard on the same team, anything's possible in a game. But I also think the emergence of players like Oscar Bobb and Antonio Nusa suggests that this isn't just a Norwegian golden generation or something like that, and this could be the start of Norway consistently producing really good players. And there's one more thing I want to end on. At the last Winter Olympics, Norway won a record-setting 16 gold medals. There are clearly athletes in the country, just look at Erling Haaland, and it's finally starting to transition to the pitch. They have a football culture that's growing. It's now the most popular played sport in Norway. And with that, how many athletes they have, the emergence of world-class talent, I think Norway might be an emerging world power on the game. And they're definitely going to be somebody to look at for the future. And yeah, that's all I got to talk about. If you enjoyed, like, subscribe, see ya.